Today we're going to look through all of the new 9th edition FAQs for the Imperium armies and try and highlight any important changes that might change the way that you play them. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So the 9th edition FAQs and Erratas are out in full force now. We went through the core Space Marine FAQs yesterday, so I thought today we'd turn attention to the rest of the Imperium. In this video we'll briefly summarise the FAQs for every Imperial faction and try and focus on any of the important changes that aren't just updated wording. Bear in mind that not every faction has had an FAQ for their Psychic Awakening books yet. We're still waiting to see if there's anything coming for Saga of the Beast, War of the Spider and Pariah, but we can still go through the main codexes and any of the other supplement books. Let's jump straight into it with a look at the other versions of Space Marines. So in general, carried over from the core Space Marine Codex, the changes that we saw in the Indomitors box haven't actually been carried over to the rest of the Space Marine faction yet. It looks like Plasma will start overheating only on unmodified ones, Astartes chainsaws will be giving people in general AP -1, Storm Shields will be 4+ invulns and +1 to saves, and Chaplain Litanies will happen in the command phase. As of yet though, none of those have actually been changed in the Space Marine books, so I can only presume that it's going to happen when Space Marines get their 9th edition codexes, and the same for Blood Angels, Space Wolves and the rest. All armies lost power of the Machine Spirit on vehicles. It's kind of redundant now, seeing as you can move and shoot with no heavy weapon penalty anyway. Again, in Games Workshop have said that they're going to be changing it to something else, but in the meantime it seems to be deleted, again until codexes turn up. They've clarified the wording on snipers, ignoring Lookout Sir throughout basically every single publication, and across the board any camo cloaks that add +1 to saves now do so whenever a unit is receiving the benefit of cover, even if that's something such as dense cover for example. So a unit of scouts in dense cover might get -1 to hit and also +1 to saves, as opposed to in light cover where they might get +2 to saves, for being both in that area terrain and using the camo cloak. They've clarified the wording on drop pod reinforcements now. You ignore the reinforcement limits for them, and they come down either on turns 1, 2 or 3. In terms of the actual codex changes, Blood Angels didn't get too much aside from these core changes, and it seems that Space Wolves needed nothing else clarifying whatsoever, though we are still waiting for the FAQ for Saga of the Beast. The only really important change from Blood Angels that I could see was that Librarians and Phobos armour are now able to use the Sanguinary discipline, which I don't believe they could rules as written before. Basically their datasheets that they had in Blood of Baal only said that they could take from the Obscuration discipline. Glad they cleaned this up, as that's a pretty decent option for Blood Angels Phobos Librarians, particularly buffing hard-hitting units that are starting out of the deployment zone, maybe such as Incursors. Moving on to the various other flavours of Space Marine, Dark Angels had their Grim Resolve changed so it now ignores combat attrition tests. It functionally works the same way as before. They'll just take 1 casualty from failing a morale test and no more. But a far more interesting change is that Impeccable Mobility has been changed for one of their Ravenwing Warlord traits. This one's a 6-inch aura buff, meaning that units within 6 inches could move and fire with ignoring the heavy weapon penalty. But of course vehicles and bikes all get this now for free, so they've chosen to change it to something else to give it a bit of a power boost. Now Impeccable Mobility will allow you to advance and shoot heavy weapons as assault weapons, and also ignore the penalty for advancing and shooting assault weapons. It means that a cluster of Ravenwing bikes or vehicles around this guy are going to be just blisteringly fast. Ravenwing Talon Masters already move 16 inches, so adding an advance roll on top of that could theoretically get them up to 22-inch movement while still being able to fire at full accuracy. And ignoring the penalty for moving and shooting assault weapons could also be handy on Black Knights, meaning that they won't be -1 to hit on any overcharged plasma, which will of course keep them safer. I believe that this could also be comboed with a Ravenwing Talon Master with the Huntsman trait, which allows you to shoot characters with assault weapons, meaning that you could have a weird combo of a very snipey landspeeder, potentially able to target characters with 18 fairly high strength shots per turn. It does take 2 Warlord traits to get that, but it is doable. Overall, I'm glad that they've managed to keep this Warlord trait relevant, and it still remains a very good pick, much as it was before. Deathwatch didn't get too many changes. They've clarified the additional movement rules for Vanguard Veterans and Inceptors when they're part of the big mixed kill team, meaning that they can move over enemy models and terrain horizontally, but they don't specify vertically. They just have to climb ruins and things in the normal way for infantry. I'm not 100% sure how reanimation protocols are going to be changed, but we know that they're going to be in some way, and I believe that the wording on the overkill stratagem might have been changed due to this. They've simplified the wording a little bit, basically saying that you can just use this stratagem whenever Necrons use reanimation protocols within 12 inches of a unit of Deathwatch. Finally, Deathwatch Interceptors have also got that change to the movement rules, meaning that they can use their personal teleporters to move across enemy models and terrain horizontally, but again not vertically. Moving on to the Adeptus Sororitas. The Sisters of Battle have had the Triumph of St. Catherine fixed. Basically it interacted very poorly with terrain before, having over 18 wounds, meaning that you could basically very rarely get cover saves for it, which was a bit weird as it kind of represents a whole bunch of infantry models. Basically they've changed the rule so it says it counts as 9 wounds for when it's interacting with terrain traits, basically meaning that it can now get cover saves from light cover, or be -1 to hit from dense cover and things, unlike things with 18 wounds or more or Titanic units which can't interact with these. They've defined some terrain traits for the Battle Sanctum, which wasn't something that was particularly regularly taken. It's basically area terrain that isn't treated too differently to ruins, it's breachable and scalable and also has light cover, but it also gains the heavy cover keyword as well, the one that can give your models a +1 to their saving throws in combat when they're defending it. The Mortifier datasheet was cleaned up a little bit. They used to have a special rule where they could fire heavy flamers as pistols, but now that's not relevant seeing as they can basically do that anyway. I've also clarified the way that modifiers react with a Moment of Grace, the stratagem that can allow you to expend miracle dice to add that number to a dice roll, whether it's a hit roll, wound roll, or saving throw. In general, I think that saving throws were generally the best way of doing this, but they basically just say that if you are expending multiple dice and you use it on a hit roll or wound roll, then it still will have the normal cap of +1 as per modifiers in the big rulebook. The only point in spending multiple dice on this in the hit rolls or wound rolls is if you're suffering from a -1 to hit penalty or something like that to help try and counteract it. Finally, the Order of the Sacred Rose also has the same update as the Dark Angels. They ignore combat attrition now, so again you can only suffer a maximum of 1 casualty from a morale test that's failed. Overall, not too major changes, but I'm glad that they fixed the Triumph of St. Catherine. Moving on, we have the Adeptus Custodes, where they've updated the wording for Trajan Valoris' Moment Shackle. You used to gain an additional D3 command points whenever you use your next stratagem, but now it just reduces the cost of that next stratagem to 0 command points. Probably just a bit of a tidy up special rule, seeing as it was one of the weird exceptions to command point regeneration that they had to keep on bringing up every time they used FAQs or erratas for command point regen. Overall, this one is a slight buff, as you no longer need to roll that D3, you could never regenerate more command points than you spent on the stratagem anyway, so now you automatically get the maximum. So you may as well use it on something as expensive as possible, such as that Vexilla teleport to Homer stratagem. Power of the Machine Spirit again has been removed from the Landvader, which currently makes the Vengeance of the Machine Spirit stratagem kind of useless from War of the Spider, though I'm sure this will get updated in time. Again, they've changed any wording that was less than 1 inch of enemy models to within engagement range, which is technically a little bit bigger, seeing as that counts 5 inches vertically now. Any sniper weapons that the Custodes have, ignore Lookout Sir. And they've slightly changed the Auric Shackles relic, which used to give you additional victory points if you slew the enemy warlord with that model, but I'm afraid it now no longer does so. That relic wasn't massively widely taken, but now there's even less reason to take it. So nothing enormously major, but a bit more reason to take Trajan Draps. Next up we have the Adeptus Mechanicus, who rather unfortunately have seen a fairly decent nerf to their taser weapons. Taser Goes and Lances and the electrostatic gauntlets of the Electro Priests only cause 2 hits on unmodified rolls of 6s now. I'd say this is more of a nerf than a buff, because in the Admech Codex there are plenty of ways of getting +1 to your hit roll, and it means that things like the Doctrina Imperatives aren't going to cause massive exploding taser weapon attacks now, though I'm not sure the Games Workshop really thought through that interaction when they wrote the Codex, to be fair. It is a nerf, and if any units were trying to make big use of this, then it's not quite as strong a strategy anymore. Again, with every vehicle being able to move and fire heavy weapons with no penalty, they've deleted the Dunecrawler Crawler ability, which allowed it to do that, and they've also amended the Rage of the Machines ability to do the similar thing, though that stratagem can still have some use when you apply it to assault weapons and Cognis weapons. The Imperial Knights in this codex, as with the actual main Imperial Knight codex, actually receive really quite a decent movement buff. Whenever Titanic Imperial Knights make a normal move, advance or fall back, they can now do so over intervening units unless they are monsters or vehicles. They could currently already fall back over infantry and swarms, but this is really quite a big movement buff, both in falling back and just in movement in general. You now can no longer hold an Imperial Knight back just by stretching out a few guardsmen directly in front of it, and to be honest I think that this is a pretty thematic change. It was weird to see that occurring in the first place in the game. Definitely a helpful buff to Imperial Knights anyway. Again, much like the Adeptus Auroritas stratagem, they've also clarified how modifiers work with the Doctrina Imperatives. Skitari units with a data tether can get +2 to their hit rolls if you use the stratagem on them, but as per the big rulebook that will be reduced to +1, so the only real advantage of having a data tether in the unit for this stratagem is if you picked up a -1 to hit penalty from somewhere. It does certainly make those stratagems less useful on units with data tethers. So overall from the FAQ, a bit of a nerf to some of the key Admech units, particularly things like Sindonian Dragoons are not going to be happy with this, addition to the changes to modifiers that we already had. Now we come to the Guard, where conspicuously absent is any change to the Mordian doctrine. I was really hoping that it might at least allow universal overwatch in the Guard, even if it wasn't on a 5+, but now you can only overwatch once per turn with a stratagem. It really is a pretty bad regimental trait. Looks like we might have to wait to the Codex for that one to get sorted out. In part of this FAQ, they've updated the grinding advance wording again, but it does at least appear to me that they might have missed the Hammer of Sunderance out of the turret weapons list, and I believe that if they have, then it means that you wouldn't technically be able to double fire it with grinding advance at the moment. Likely a copy-paste error and a bit of an oversight, but certainly annoying if that is right. Similar to Space Marine camo cloaks, Ratlings and Sly Marvo will now get +1 to their saves whenever they're receiving the benefit of cover, so including applying things like heavy cover or dense cover. And the Valhallan doctrine has also been updated slightly to better fit in with the new morale rules, although it is a little bit worse than it was previously. It now appears that the Valhallan's grim demeanour only affects the combat attrition part of the leadership phase, so it won't apply to that first casualty, but you do round the fractions down when you get a half result. So I believe if you do just have one guy flee from combat attrition, then that will go to being no guys fleeing whatsoever from that, and you'd only take the one that's fleeing from the actual failed morale test. Functionally, under normal circumstances, I believe that this will be the same as it was before. Finally, they have thrown the Talon Desert Raiders a bone, though it's not a particularly powerful one. Talon used to ignore the penalty for moving and shooting heavy weapons with vehicles, which now of course all vehicles do, so now they've had their rule changing to allow vehicles to advance and shoot heavy weapons as if they were assault weapons. It's nice that they got something, but I'm really not sure how relevant this is going to be in most circumstances. In general, I still don't think that you're going to be wanting to advance with the vehicles if it's going to make you -1 to hit. It would have been a lot nicer if you'd been able to ignore the penalty of advancing and shooting assault weapons, much like the Raven Wing change, but otherwise I think it's going to be quite niche application when you absolutely need that extra bit of mobility. It's probably most useful on things like Heavy Flamer Sentinels or Hellhounds, where they have auto-hitting weapons. They won't have any qualms about advancing every single turn to get those weapons in range faster. Finally, we come on to the Imperial Knights, who I do think by far the most important change was the change to their movement. It will certainly make them more flexible and harder to pin down if they can basically move over any unit that isn't a monster vehicle. In addition to this, they've cleaned up the datasheet for the Armature autocannon. It's no longer relevant that it ignores the penalty to moving and shooting, because of course everything does. The Sacristan Forge Shrine terrain piece has acquired a bunch of terrain tag keywords such as area terrain, scalable, breachable, dense cover and defensible. It is still very expensive for what you get, but it is quite interesting setting up something that has the dense cover tag wherever you'd like in your own deployment zone. Perhaps a lot more useful for other armies to access rather than Imperial Knights, but I suppose it could at least theoretically give you -1 to hit on your armatures turn 1. Finally, as we'd already seen previewed by Games Workshop before, Knight Lances that have your Warlord in will refund the command points of the Super Heavy detachment that they're in. So if you're taking a full Super Heavy detachment with 3 Titanic Knights, then that will cost 6 command points, all of which will be refunded if your Warlord is in the same detachment. Compared with other Titanic units and Lords of War, Imperial and Chaos Knights really have a massive leg up in terms of being able to get more command points. So that brings us to the end of our summary of the FAQs for the Imperial factions. Not a whole load of major changes, a few minor buffs and nerfs here and there, but by and large they seem to have accounted for the majority of changes within the main core rulebook. I do feel like these are very much a stopgap until we actually get 9th Codexes on the way. I'll certainly be interested to see what happens with armies such as Necrons and Space Marines when they get their books released. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for more similar 40k content coming out pretty much every day. If you've been enjoying the videos recently, I'd just like to mention that the channel does have a Patreon page, which is what allows me to create so much content so regularly. If you have been enjoying, then feel free to give that a look. It's down in the video description below. Channel patrons get to see one video per week early, they get to vote in regular polls to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and there's also some prize draws where I give away some miniatures to lucky winners at the start of each month. If any of that sounds good, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.